When it comes to designs that are blazing hot at the moment in terms of popularity, the integrated bracelet steel sport watch category immediately is the one that springs to mind first. Now the challenge though is that the demand and the price makes the game tricky at the high end. However, many brands have either made intentional creations that cater to this style and others that offer more of a standalone alternative at a more attainable price. So in this video, I wanted to look at 4 to 5 integrated steel sports-esque style watches that I am asked about quite a bit. We also on our website are asked about all the time in our consultation feature. So I just wanted to kind of address this at scale in a way because people are always pairing these different types of watches against one another, and these were kind of 4 to 5 of the common examples that are just mentioned all the time. And just to address this up front, I always argue it's worthwhile for people to save up for the watch that they truly want and not to settle. But this is a design style where saving for the watch some might call the real thing is simply unreasonable in the vast majority of cases. So to begin, we're gonna look at these watches in ascending order of price to mark some of the key points in the background of all the models. And then finally, once we look at all these watches from a high level, we'll then kind of get into the details of what watch is best for what type of scenario and really what you should kind of consider when looking in the direction of these pieces as somebody who has spent a considerable amount of time with all of these watches. So to begin here, I'm gonna look at our first 2 watches, both being the Tissot PRX, the quartz, as well as the Powermatic 80 version. Now, when the PRX quartz was launched earlier this year, it immediately resonated in the market. And Tissot is a brand that has always been known for its demonstration of good value. So when that was coupled with a retro design take on the integrated sports design within Tissot's archive, it landed extremely well. The quartz version was priced at $375, making it nearly immediately one of the leading choices for an entry-level Swiss-made watch. Why it wowed? I think it ultimately came down to the finishing for the price. In a price range where bracelets are often an afterthought, Tissot did a fantastic job in delivering a bracelet that both looked and felt great on the wrist. The polished elements within the links, the polished bevel casting along the case, and a comfortable wearing experience made the watch perhaps the most talked about attainable watch of the entire year. The watch also resembled more Rolex Oyster quartz than any of the Swiss trilogy, which gave it a bit more of a differentiation from the standard take on this style. That said, it did come with some pushback, some being its lack of micro adjustment and the larger fixed end link that makes the watch wear like a true 40 to 41 millimeter case despite a compact lug to lug distance. But the common criticism was just the propensity of some to just frown on anything that doesn't have a mechanical movement. So when they released the Powermatic 80 version of this watch just a couple of months ago, one of the leading points of criticism vanished, especially with the great 80-hour power reserve with this new movement. Now, a couple points that surprised was that Tissot priced this rather appropriately, as I was anticipating pricing a bit higher when this was first kind of unveiled, but it came in at just $650. The unchanged elements of the case still managed to shine even at a bit of an elevated price point, while still having the name of one of the most respected brands in this price range on the dial. Now that dial did have a bit of a different texture, which some people liked, some people did not like, but it certainly did lean a bit more into the world of high horology sports watches. But the Tissot PRX, in terms of its wearability, if it works for you, is an absolute no-brainer when it comes to the value department. Moving from a major mass market brand in Tissot to a more obscure independent brand that I would describe as rapidly increasing in its popularity, we have the Essence from Formex. So Formex, despite being a bit of a newcomer by watch standards, is still a brand that has roots dating back to the year 1999, developing a reputation creating watches with motorsport themes. That said, the brand started to develop a bit more claim in the last several years with the release of the Formex Essence. Despite not truly having an integrated bracelet, it shares many of the same design undertones and does so with some of the best finishing that you're gonna find for this price in all of watches. That said, early iterations of the Essence did not come without a lot of criticism, mostly when it came down to the logo. The pushback actually culminated into Formex listening to detractors, unveiling a new logo and offering a new 39mm case size to meet smaller wrist consumers as well. Now, compared to the other brands on this list, Formex isn't going to have much in the way of brand equity and would likely be a bit harder to move on from in the event that you did want to actually sell this piece and get something new, since they are an independent brand. But it is packaged with case finishing that I would say, for the dollar amount, beats pretty much everything else on this list. The bracelet links are phenomenal. The case suspension system, although a bit of a gimmick at times, does offer some great just room when contorting your wrist and shows no corners were cut. And also, you do get some peace of mind with a cost certified movement within. Much of this does not come as much of a surprise once you know the family behind this company also is an owner of an OEM parts manufacturer that is producing parts for some of the leading manufacturers in Switzerland. And this kind of essence here is almost an embodiment or a demonstration of them just kind of showing their impressive finishing capabilities. When it comes to an even more aggressive on-the-nose execution of high horology sports watches, we have to mention one of the most regularly mentioned watches out there for this style, the Maurice Lacroix Aikon Automatic. The Aikon of all of these feels the closest to encroaching on homage territory, but there is no question it is a well-executed piece and has been a kind of go-to alternative in this $2,000 price range long before others identified this trend. At their launch, there was not nearly the amount of variations that one will find today with the Ventura collection, the Chronos, and the 39mm case variant to reside along that of the long-standing 42mm variant. The Aikon opts for a multi-link bracelet with a hobnail style dial that certainly takes a page out of the Royal Oak's playbook, but is the most visually dynamic of the entire bunch, showing a nice executed finish. In addition, the Aikon on this list offers the most in the department of water resistance, sustaining 200 meters. And now to round out our list, we have the Frederique Constant Highlife. So like the PRX, the FC Highlife is a newer creation being launched officially in 2020. It is a bit of an oddball of the bunch here, not to say that it is inferior, but it does deviate quite a bit from the central point of influence a bit more. Rather than simply going for a dial texture, the Highlife leans into a fully blown engraved globe effect, which is subtle in some lighting conditions and more noticeable in others. But from there, much of what is packaged is a bit more widely approved. This is another really great example of a well-executed bracelet, solid finishing overall being integrated into the case with large polished center links and a thinner brushed H-link that all taper to a butterfly clasp with perlage finishing within. The watch also houses a COSC certified Solita movement, offering added peace of mind coming from the accuracy standards coming from COSC, while also coming from a brand that is arguably the second most well-known behind Tissot on this list, being a member of the Citizen Watch Group. But this is also a tiered collection, which is interesting compared to the others here. So FC is offering this as their entry-level option, and then they also have some more high complication variants, including a perpetual calendar version, which also will feature a manufacturer caliber. So now that we've introduced all these pieces, kind of looked at a bit of the background, talked about them from a high level, I want to start getting into the decision-making process. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I find a lot of people are kind of stumped when they're dealing with, they want something of this style, they look at all these different options as potential possibilities. I just get this question all the freaking time that I just wanted to address it in this way. So let's just go kind of one by one and speak to which one might make the most sense for what type of individual and what are just some things to consider. Now, first starting with the Tissot PRX, this is, I think goes without being said, the value play. I have not come across a watch under $1,000 with this kind of integrated style bracelet that is executed to this degree. In terms of total value, I think the quartz version is a bit of a better package, considering you're looking at $375. Case finishing is going to be right on par with that of the $650 variant. So really what you're paying for in that elevated option with the Powermatic 80 is that mechanical movement, which from a logical perspective doesn't make that much sense. From the romantic perspective of loving just a mechanical watch, I get it. So you just kind of have to figure out where you're gonna fall. In terms of the probably best value play of this entire list, the quartz option, without question, I think is far enough separation from that of the Formex where it makes even more sense in comparing it to the Maurice Lacroix and like the FC Highlife. The thing is just so much cheaper. It just makes so much more sense. And is the finishing on those other watches multiples of that of the PRX? I really don't think so, and I think that's why the PRX just makes a ton of sense. Either of them, but I think the PRX quartz makes even more sense if you just want to get into this, you don't really care about mechanical movements, and you just want to get into a watch of this style on the cheap. One thing I will mention about the PRX though, if you are somebody that is a bit more sensitive to larger cases or you like watches that wear small on your wrist, the PRX isn't necessarily that. It's a watch that's gonna wear pretty true to a 41 millimeter case. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's not a large watch by any means, but that extended case link at the end that meets the case in the bracelet. It is a little bit of a different approach. If you've ever worn a integrated steel sports style watch, you'll know what this feels like. Some people like it, some people don't like it, but just kind of keep that in mind. The visual dynamic for some, it might take a little bit of time for your eyes to adjust for this when you first put it on, but just keep in mind it wears pretty true to its size. But now jumping into kind of this next tier, this is where things start to get a bit tricky. Now, Formex, in terms of the Essence, let's just get this out of the way. In terms of a spec junkie breakdown, if you just go down the list and look at what it's delivering for the money, it probably is in a nice sweet spot for many people. The finishing on the bracelet on this is probably the best of anything on this list, and it's honestly, from a price standpoint, towards the lower end for the watches that we're looking at. So that really speaks highly of what is happening here. You're also getting a COSC certified movement on the inside, getting some proprietary types of patented just approaches with the case suspension system. You also have the extension within the clasp of the bracelet. There is a lot going for the Formex. I will just say this at the end. In terms of the design of the dial, I think it's a little bit maybe lagging behind some of the others on this list. It's a bit more straightforward. It's got a bit of some Aqua Terra vibe, no question, in terms of the striping on that dial surface. But I think the number one challenge with the Formex Essence, if you're kind of looking at it with just your mind in terms of what it's delivering and if you're handling this watch, it's just really impressive. But the brand equity discussion, if this is something that really is important to you, you're not completely settled on getting into this world or watch of this design style, and you might see yourself in a few years down the road having to move off from this, that is just one thing to consider. The market for a Formex compared to a Tissot or even a Maurice Lacroix and a Frederique is entirely different. This is an independent brand, they're limited production, so just keep that in mind when looking at this watch. Figure out how much weight you put on that compared to maybe just testing the waters of a design style like this. That's going to probably make you start looking in the other directions a bit more. But if you just want finishing, the Formex Essence does make a lot of sense because that bracelet, I think, is the best of this entire list. When you're talking about the most on-the-nose style of design compared to that of the AP Royal Oak, the Maurice Lacroix Aikon is going to be that watch. The thing with this watch, though, is it comes in $2,000. In terms of the bracelet, I would say it's number 2 behind the Formex. Dial finish, I actually think it might be the best of the bunch. Surprisingly, I actually think the Tissot Powermatic 80 is probably closely behind us, given that visual dynamic of that texturized surface. But I do think the Maurice Lacroix Aikon has the most in the dial department. It really does look great. The perlage finishing within that clasp is also a nice touch as well, showing they're not cutting any corners. You are not getting a COSC certified movement compared to the Formex and the FC, so that is something to kind of keep in mind here. But also, variety of different case options, just like the Essence as well. So if you're looking for a smaller option, the Essence as well as the Maurice Lacroix Aikon are going to probably be best for you. But again, there are just gonna be people that are just not going to like how close and similar this is to some of those high horology sports watches, primarily the Royal Oak. It's getting into homage territories. You have to know what it is. But again, when you're talking about a higher end model that is completely unattainable now, you can't even get, even if you did have the money to spend, it's, I think, creates a different type of equation. Now getting into the FC Highlife, unfortunately, I think this is probably the watch that is in the most difficult position compared to all of these other watches, primarily being that the dial is a bit different and I think some people don't like it as much. I don't necessarily have any strong feelings about it one way or the other, but it isn't a little bit as direct as the others on this list in terms of where they're drawing their inspiration. And then in addition to that, the 50 meters of water resistance is probably the biggest issue, I think, of any of the watches on this list. I think many people are going to want at least 100 meters for a watch of this type, so that is one thing going against the FC. In terms of what it does have going for it, it is very different than the other typical just variations that are going at a watch of this style. So I know that's important for some people out there, and if you are someone that leans in that direction, you want something that kind of stands on its own with its design more, but also of course has some ties, and you can certainly see the crossover, that's where the FC starts making more sense. You're also getting a brand that, in terms of delivering good value for money, has a good reputation in this arena. COSC certified movement on the inside. The bracelet is also very well done, different, entirely different, maybe the most different aspect of all of these watches, but it is very well executed though. But in terms of the one that's probably a bit more specific for the type of consumer, this would be the one, but that 50 meters of water resistance is the number one downside of this watch and the thing that's probably working against it at the end of the day. But in summary, if you want the most value, I would stick with the PRXs. If you're just testing the water, I would go with the PRXs. If you want wearability, I would go for either the Formex or the 39mm variant for the Aikon. If you want some more presence, I think you can go for any of these at the end of the day. I think for a larger wrist, you're gonna find a lot of just wearability with the 43mm Formex Essence. I think you could also pull off the PRX, and the two or higher end options as well with the Aikon at the 42mm variant, maybe even going for a chrono version, and then also looking at the FC Highlife as I think kind of a nice middle ground in terms of wearability. In terms of finishing for the dollar amount, I would go for either the Tissot PRX quartz version. I think at $375, I mean, it's just so hard to beat. Even at the $650 option, it's still in the equation, but I would say the Formex Essence, there's a pretty significant jump, as you're gonna notice, in terms of the bracelet finishing on that. So I would say those two are probably, for a dollar amount in finish that you're getting, probably in the lead there. But all right, guys, that is kind of just an overview of these pieces. There is a full video of all of these watches that I've done in the past as well. So if you want even more information, I can link to all of those down below as well. But I just wanted to make this video because just getting a ton of questions around this topic and just wanted to address it at scale as well. But guys, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Also, if you want to see more videos like this, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to just see what's kind of on your mind, just kind of going through and navigating what is the best watch for what type of individual and scenario, of kind of comparing watches of similar types. I think this is always helpful, and I think it seems like you guys appreciate as well. Also, TeddyBaldassarre.com, we are a full authorized dealer of all the brands featured in this video. So if you are in the market for these watches, definitely go check it out. Full authorized dealer, full factory warranty, dedicated customer support as well. And finally, 9 out of every $10 that we generate goes right back into this content that we're creating. Also, if you want to stay up to date with the content, definitely check out the Instagram as well. See some cool photos of watches in the process. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.